Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is March 24th, 2025, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? Another quick map update, a lot of good news today as well from Belgorod and another one from Toretsk, and then I'll go over some important news updates I wanted to give you guys. So I'll get back to my previous video where I did mention the Ukrainians did an incursion into Belgorod and are currently fighting around the area of Demidovka. The Russians have confirmed officially this weekend that the Ukrainians did indeed take up positions. They have control over this village that is about 2 to 3 kilometers from the border with Ukraine and Belgorod. And now today they're confirming that the Ukrainians are also doing another small incursion towards this very, very small village of Popovka. You can see that it's sitting on a hill. And if we look at the satellite image, you can see that it's right on a very forested area. So apparently there's some Russian units stationed here, and so the Ukrainians are fighting here to get the Russians out of Popovka. What I'm seeing here is the Ukrainians are trying to create a buffer zone, not allowing the Russians, if in the future they were to do an offensive of their own, to enter the Ukrainian territory and kind of create a similar situation like in Vovchansk, where they began an offensive back in May and took up positions, and they've destroyed all the small villages in the big city of Vovchansk. That was about 15 to 20,000 people prior to the incursion by the Russians. So the Ukrainians are trying to do a reversal of that, and also, as I've said previously, forcing the Russians to react to the Ukrainian offensive rather than having the opposite happen to the Ukrainians. Similar to what we saw in Kursk, right? The Ukrainians forced the Russians to transfer a lot of resources, manpower, and in 7 months, the Russians really struggled to take back the territory that Ukraine had been occupying. So this is the same, I think, idea here. It's not about annexing or pushing all the way up to Belgorod. It's about just forcing the Russians to make mistakes first, as they're unprepared, and they have to then transfer units out of Kursk, possibly out of Kharkiv region, to try to take back these small areas. But I'm not trying to say here that somehow Ukraine is going to be able to break through dozens and dozens of kilometers. It's all about destabilizing the Russians and not allowing them to continue on pushing and crossing the border to Ukraine and pillaging and destroying Ukrainian villages and cities. And unfortunately, we also have some bad news today from Sumy, where the Russians continue with their artillery and bomb strikes, and they struck another housing building, civilian building in Sumy, injuring over 80 people and killing several. So this kind of shows us how ready Putin is for peace talks. But that's kind of the update I want to give you guys for this region in Belgorod, Kursk, and Sumy. A lot of positive news for the Ukrainians. And another one I want to give you guys in Toretsk. We have some good news in Toretsk as well. It's not confirmed yet by the deep state map, but we have some images and videos confirming that the Ukrainians were able to liberate this region of Nelipivka. So they pushed kind of west of Toretsk. And you can see there's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes the Ukrainians push inside of Toretsk, then the Russians push back. So this is a very dynamic situation. Not saying that the Ukrainians are going to be able to break through here, but there's a lot of push and pull. But you're seeing success on the Ukrainian side and sometimes on the Russian side, because Toretsk and this specific area is very important for the Russians to continue then pushing towards Konstantinivka, which is a big Ukrainian stronghold. And the Russians are eyeing for this. And this is also part of the larger image that the Russians want to do a massive push for the summer. Not surprising. I think that Putin might be feeling like this could be the very last year that he could do a massive offensive before his forces get exhausted. And so this is also part of the strategy why Ukraine is counterattacking heavily in certain areas. Sometimes, as we saw in Belgorod and Kursk, in other regions, to force the Russians to divert resources that they were planning to use for their own major offensive for this summer and spring. So that's the situation on the front line. Now I want to give you guys some more good updates with regards to Russia losing a lot of air assets this week, specifically in the weekend. So let's get back to the main news. And this happened, the first news update I want to give you guys, just to show you on the map, in the village of Ivanya in Belgorod. So if I find it here, I'll show you guys where it is exactly. It's about Ivnya. So this is the little village of Ivnya. The Russians had stationed about 4 helicopters in this village, about 60 kilometers away from the border, and the Ukrainian scouts and reconnaissance drones were able to notice them been parked somewhere in this region in Ivnya, and they were able to destroy them with HIMARS missiles. And this brings me to the video that was shared by the Ukrainian Special Forces. As you can see here, they confirmed that they've managed to destroy 4 Russian helicopters. 2 of them were Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopters, and 2 of them were MIA transport helicopters. So a massive, massive loss for the Russians, worth, over $100 million at the very least, when you combine all of these helicopters together. And apparently 2 pilots were also killed as a result of this HIMARS strike, where they used cluster munitions to make sure that they were damaged at the very least. So this is an excellent strike by the Ukrainians, and you can see how the Russians heavily depend on these helicopters, and especially with the context of what I was telling you, with the border incursion by the Ukrainians, they're probably trying to quickly bring supplies and also have attack helicopters being present to attack Ukrainian positions as quickly as possible. But thankfully, Ukraine was able to destroy all 4 of these helicopters. Additionally, Russia confirmed today that they lost an Su-25 that crashed because of an engine malfunction. Apparently, the pilot survived. Unfortunately, this happened in Primorsky Krai. And also this weekend, there was a Russian Su-34 fighter bomber that had to do an emergency landing because its landing gear failed, and it sustained serious damage to the underbody and also one of its engines, which was torn off. And they say they will send this jet fighter for long-term repairs. I'm not an expert in here, but I'm guessing that this is a total loss. I could be wrong, but either way, if they are to repair this is going to take a very, very long time to repair an Su-34. Because its structural integrity has been damaged. But I could be wrong here. So this has been a really great day for Ukraine, as Russian jet fighters, as we're seeing, continue to decay. You have engine malfunctions, landing gear failing, pilots dying as well as a result of this latest Ukrainian HIMARS attack on helicopters. So you are seeing a big decay in the quality of the Russian Air Force, which is really great news, because this then reduces the amount of bombings and terrorist acts that the Russians can do in Ukrainian cities, like the one we saw in Sumy today, which injured over 80 people, unfortunately. And last but not least, I need to talk about Trump, and I will continue to talk about him because we know that today there's more talks in Saudi Arabia. He's meeting, his delegation is meeting with Ukraine, has met with Ukraine yesterday. Now they're meeting with Russia, and they're now, downgrading this ceasefire to a maritime ceasefire. From what I understand, they can't agree. First, it was a whole ceasefire throughout the entire front line. Then they said, okay, maybe we'll just do a maritime and missile ceasefire, but that hasn't been working. And according to the Telegraph, they're citing sources close to Trump that Trump is getting very irritated by the ongoing strikes happening between that Russia continues to do and Ukraine, despite his peace efforts. And he reportedly is very frustrated. He's irritated by the continued missile and drone attacks. And who's surprised here? Again, this weekend, we saw a very disgraceful interview with Tucker Carlson and the special envoy to Russia, Steve Witkoff. And, out of all the people you could have done an interview, he decided to go with Tucker Carlson, a pro-Russian idiot, useful idiot. And he said that, Steve Witkoff said that Russian President Vladimir Putin was super smart and he didn't regard him as a bad guy. And one thing that really outraged me personally is when I heard that he said that when the Kremlin claims that the referendums in the 4 Ukraine regions that have been seized by Moscow but do not fully control, he said that they were peacefully done and that the people that are under Russian rule there voted for that, democratically speaking, for this referendum, which really angered me because it's pretty much normalizing annexation. And it's no different than what we saw Nazi Germany do with Czechoslovakia in World War II, which started World War II essentially. So you're seeing that the Trump administration, while they get irritated, they're only helping the Russians right now. They're propagating their narratives, their pro-Russian propaganda. And so who is surprised here that Ukraine is not going to trust that and continue with their strikes? Because Ukraine set the condition as well that we're going to end those strikes as long as Russia ends it on their side as well. We haven't been seeing that. I've said in my live stream last week when there was a phone call between Trump and Putin, what happened a few hours later? Russia did a massive missile and drone strike attack against Ukraine. So clearly, we can't expect the Russians to play fair here. and their word means absolutely nothing. And here you have one of the most important members of Trump's administration saying that Putin is super smart, he's not a bad guy, and actually, you know, the territories that Russia annexed, well, they did it legitimately because the people that are unfortunately living under this occupation wanted this Russian occupation. I will continue to say this, but what will likely happen, seeing that Trump is already getting irritated, which is not surprising, is that Trump will seek to blame, and I said that in my previous video, he'll seek to blame one side for the eventual failure of these talks. Because these talks aren't going to bring us to peace, I'm convinced. And we can never expect the Russians to play fair here. And it's obviously going to be easier for Trump to blame Ukraine, Europe, and other NATO allies because they don't speak the language of Trump. And as we've been seeing, his administration, Trump himself, have total respect for Putin, and they're pushing his propaganda. They haven't said once that Putin is a dictator, that Putin started this war, that Putin is destroying Ukrainian cities. No such things were said by the Trump administration. And as I've said in my previous video, he sees Russia as a partner, that he can go against China. He can deorbit Russia out of China's influence. And he also really respects Putin's leadership style. And he actually wants to emulate it in the US, as we've been seeing last 3 months have been totally chaotic in the US, with Trump, Elon Musk, and all his other members dismantling democratic institutions, cutting off thousands and thousands of jobs, and just going against the law everywhere they can. So, in my opinion, the Trump administration is beginning to become very relevant in actually solving this war. And as a matter of fact, I'm more and more convinced that they are becoming a part of the problem and facilitating Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I would not be surprised if this is one of those scenarios where Trump will put the blame on Ukraine and Europe and say, I'm done with you, I'm cutting off the aid, and we're working with Russia now only. I wouldn't be surprised. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my update. Let me know in the comments section what you guys think about, you know, what I stated here about Trump, the possible scenario that could occur in a few months. And I'm very, very grateful for your support. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave me a comment, and I will see you in the next one. Slava Ukraini!